In 1995, an attorney decided he wanted to create a horror movie. Drawing inspiration from an unofficial advisor, he created a movie about a serial killer who hunted and killed women in the woods. 13 years later, that very advisor would bring those chilling ideas to life. Hey there everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's case is about a man called Gary Hilton, who is also known as the National Forest serial killer. As always, viewers' discretion is advised, as there will be talk of violence, and in this case there will be some descriptions of mutilation. Before we go any further, please remember to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our following stories. And with that, let's get on with it. Hilton was born on the 26th of November 1946 in Atlanta, Georgia. Father was William E. Hilton and his mother was Cleo M. Reynolds. We don't really know what happened between his parents, but we do know that his mum went on to remarry. He was raised by his mum and his stepdad, Nilo DeBag. We also know that his dad went on to remarry twice, but there's no information about the relationship, if any relationship, he had with his father. It's known that DeBag was mentally and verbally abusive towards Hilton, and that Hilton kind of blamed him for taking his mum away. In 1958, when Hilton was 12, the family moved to Hialeah in Florida, and then at the age of 13, it would appear that the abuse from DeBag got too much for Hilton, as it's recorded that Hilton actually shot DeBag. He didn't kill him, and DeBag didn't press charges, but his mother did kick him out of the house. He wasn't allowed to return home until he started school. After he shot DeBag, he was placed on a mental health ward, and they looked into him, but he was quickly released. And then after he started school, he was allowed back home. He was given a second chance, but things obviously didn't change, because at the age of 14, he was put into foster care, and he went to live with a couple called Mark and Dawn Jeffers. There's no further information of disruption in the rest of his childhood, so I'd like to assume that the rest of his childhood was like unproblematic once he got away from his mum and stepfather. But whatever the case, in 1964, at the age of 18, he enlisted in the army. While in the army, he received basic training. He also got his GED, and he spent some time in Germany. However, while he was serving, he actually started to hear voices in his head, and he ended up having a complete mental breakdown. So he was hospitalized in a mental health facility, and he was actually diagnosed with schizophrenia. Due to the diagnosis, he was placed on medication, and he had to be discharged from the army. I couldn't find why, but he wasn't given a psychiatric discharge. He was actually given an honourable discharge, and he left the army in 1967 at the age of 21. And there's not a great deal of information about his life afterwards. We know that at the age of 23 he got his chauffeur's license, so I assume that he held a chauffeur job for a while. We do know that between 1983 and 1995 that he was charged with a selection of crimes, including possession of drugs, carrying a weapon without a license, theft, stealing books from the American Book Display Company, and there were 21 counts of solicitation. Over this time he was given 5 years probation, then he was given 10 years probation. I don't know if they were to be carried out consecutively or concurrently. I couldn't find information about that, but basically he was on probation for a really long time. And he became so weird twist of events. He had an attorney called Charles Samuel Rail, and him and Rail kind of ended up having like this friendship over the years. Rail was just used to him. Rail looked at Hilton as if he was like just a friendly weirdo, but he thought he was harmless. How wrong he would be. And yeah, so they struck up a friendship. And then weirdly, in 1995, Rail decided he wanted to produce a movie. He wanted to make a horror movie. And Hilton apparently was very creative, and came up with ideas, and so he ended up kind of becoming like a creative consultant for rail. It's odd. It's a weird like little twist of things, but it happened. And they ended up making a film called Deadly Run, and this film was, we're talking like Z-list horror movie, not even like a fucking B movie. This thing is just not good. But it does exist. It went straight to video. It was about a psychotic killer who would abduct women, take them into the woods, set them free, and then hunt them down. Hilton was a creative consultant for this. He helped come up with ideas. He even helped find a really good location. The next thing I could find after the film was in 1997, so 2 years later. Hilton had lost contact with rail. He ended up meeting a guy called John Tabor, who gave him somewhere to live and gave him a job. And for the next 10 years he was selling siding for insulated wall systems for Tabor. Although he had somewhere to live, he was still a big fan of being outside. And then for those 10 years, so between 1997 and 2007, there's no record of any like criminal activity or any misdemeanors or anything like that. He seems to have spent 10 years just working and being a regular person, I guess. But it didn't last, and in 2007 Tabor filed a complaint after Hilton threatened to kill him unless he gave him $10,000. Now, I don't know if he owed Hilton 10 grand or if Hilton was just demanding 10 grand. I don't know. But he threatened to kill him if he didn't give him 10k. Shortly after that encounter, it would come to light that Gary Hilton, this lover of living in the woods and just a petty criminal, was in fact a much more dangerous man. On October the 21st, 2007, a retired couple from North Carolina decided to go for a hike through Pisgah National Forest. They were John Bryant, who was 80 years old, and his wife Irene Bryant, who was 84. They were experienced hikers, so to begin with, while they were away, their family didn't question the lack of communication. However, after not hearing from them for 2 weeks, the family did then report them as missing. A search party was swiftly put together. There were more than 30 volunteers, there were cadaver dogs, and there was a helicopter as well. Police looked through phone records, and it was discovered that John did actually attempt to call 911 on the day of their disappearance. However, the signal dropped, and the call was lost. Unfortunately, on the 10th of November, the search party did locate a body. It was covered in leaves, and 3 days later it was identified as the body of Irene Bryant. She had been bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. Upon identification of Irene, the FBI launched an investigation, and they offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could lead to an arrest. Simultaneously, while this was happening, it was revealed that someone used a bank card that belonged to the Bryants. They removed $300 from an ATM in Ducktown, Tennessee. They checked the surveillance cameras, and the person who took money was an older Caucasian male, but he was in a yellow rain jacket, and that kind of covered his face, so they weren't able to identify who it was. However, they were able to identify that it wasn't John who was taking the money. So John was still missing. They believed he'd been abducted by the same man who had killed Irene. Although the investigation continued, unfortunately it wasn't until February 3rd, 2008 that a man called Mark Waldrop, who was a hunter, actually found a skull in the Nantahala National Forest. Upon finding the skull, he called the authorities, and they performed a closer inspection, and about 20 yards away from the skull they actually found a spine and a pelvis. There was no ID, there was no clothing, so this was sent off to be identified, and 2 days later it was identified as John Bryant. While the police were still looking for John Bryant, a woman named Cheryl Dunlap from Crawfordsville, Florida, failed to show up at church in Tallahassee on the 3rd of December, where she was supposed to be teaching Sunday school. The next day, her family reported her missing after her vehicle was located just past the state line. And approximately 5 days later, a search party of about 180 people went looking for her. But it wasn't until the 16th of December that a hunter by the name of Ronnie Rentz discovered a decapitated, decomposing human body. I cannot imagine what it must have been like for either of the hunters who discovered body remains. How you mentally deal with something like that, I can't imagine how hard that must be. I know they're hunters and they're used to killing things, but humans and animals are a little bit different, you know? The remains that were discovered were later identified as Cheryl Dunlap using DNA sampling. Authorities announced that they were looking for a suspicious green truck. Apparently a green truck had been seen in the area at the time of Cheryl's disappearance, and it was driven by a man who had since used her bank card 5 times in Tallahassee, and he had actually withdrawn $700 from her bank account. They received numerous tips about a strange homeless man with a dog, like a red dog. No one was entirely sure of the dog breed, but it was a red dog, who had been seen around the same kind of time and who was in a green van. However, at the time, this didn't lead to an arrest, but it was information that would prove to be vital in the future. 16 days later, on New Year's Day of 2008, a young sales manager by the name of Meredith Emerson decided to go on a hike with her black lab named Ella along the Freeman Trail on Blood Mountain in Georgia's Vogel State Park. According to several witnesses, they had observed an older gentleman with his dog following her at the time. On the 3rd of January, they located her vehicle, a Chevrolet Cavalier, and inside were items such as a water bottle, a dog leash, and randomly a police baton. So whether this was used by Hilton to get her to do what he wanted, I don't know. I am assuming. Thanks to the witnesses who had seen Meredith Emerson being followed by the older man, the police were able to investigate further, and they discovered that the man who had been seen following her was 61-year-old Gary Hilton. He was a local drifter. He was known for strange behaviour, and he had a bad temper. But he was often seen walking his dog Dandy. Dandy was a golden retriever who had like a red in his coat. So he matched the red dog mentioned in the Cheryl Dunlap case. After discovering this, they were able to announce him as a person of interest in the Meredith Emerson case. The police were requesting that they could officially interrogate this person. A day after the announcement, Emerson's dog Ella actually was found wandering a Kroger parking lot, and so she was able to be returned back safely to Emerson's family. They also discovered numerous items that belonged to Meredith Emerson inside a dumpster at a Quick Trip parking lot in Cumming. They discovered her bloodied clothing, her wallet, her driver's license, a University of Georgia ID card, and a bloodied car seat belt. Thankfully, 5 hours after discovering these items, Hilton was actually arrested. They received an anonymous phone call to say that the man that they were looking for was just randomly vacuuming his van in the car park of some establishment.
Yeah, that one. What's the exact location?
I had the person of interest in that missing woman case is at this Chevron gas station on Ashford Dunwoody.
Chevron gas station and ask we're done with him?
Yeah.
You said the man is there?
The van is here. The dog is here, the red dog, and I saw the man's face, and I've been watching the news, and I know it's him. I know it's him. He's got a green long sleeve sweatshirt, and he's wearing a hat, and he's emptying all this stuff out of his van. Pillows and a blanket, and it looks like he's got a sleeping bag right now. Taking it all to the trash. It's definitely,
And the dumpster is
looking around like he is as guilty as sin.
Okay, sir, and the dumpster is at the rear of the location?
Yeah, the dumpster, well, it's kind of right in the front. It's right by the car wash.
Okay.
I can go take him down if you want.
No, sir, stay right there.
Okay.
Okay, hold on, sir.
He looks like he's finishing up. You guys gotta hurry. He's got stuff in bags that he's emptied onto the ground, and he's taking load by load to the dumpster behind the car wash. This is the third backpack we've seen him take to the dumpster. Oh, I'm just shaking. You guys, is there somebody en route?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. Here comes the cops.
So after being arrested on the 5th of January, he was transferred to the county jail and he was charged with kidnapping. This was based on the material evidence that they had found so far. While he was being held in prison, the search for Meredith's body continued. They were searching a 90 square mile area of Chattahoochee National Forest Park. Unfortunately, at this time, they were unsuccessful. They searched his van that matched the description as reported earlier in all of the tips by witnesses. And they noticed that it was actually missing one of the rear seatbelts. And the rear seatbelt that was amongst Emerson's belongings that they discovered in the dumpster actually matched the van. So they went to Hilton and they made him an offer. And the offer was in exchange of them dropping the death penalty as a punishment, and for assuring that Dandy, his dog, would be safely rehomed, that he would show them where he had disposed of Meredith Emerson's body.
In other words, on Blood Mountain, it's a good place to hunt because it's the most used day hiking trail in the state of Georgia. But it's a bad place to hunt in that you
Because they have a lot of people.
So the way you would do it,
Witnesses.
so the way you would do it would be to lurk in a blind, so to speak, off the trail, observe with binoculars, and lurk. But I didn't do that either because I like to hike. So a bunch of people saw me, and then it was a mistake to pick Meredith. Yeah, because as you said, she almost whipped my ass. You said, didn't you say, I bet that 120-pound girl almost whipped your ass? She almost whipped my ass. She damn sure did. I lost control of both of them, both the knife and the bat. Showed her the knife, grabbed the fucking, it's a bayonet, so it's all shit anyway. All it is a spike to stick with, it's not a slasher. Grabbed the bayonet, and somehow I lost control of the bayonet and lost it, period, and it went down. I pulled the bat, deployed it, grabbed that. I mean, it was not my finest hour. It was not I'm better than that. I am. But I found out she was a fucking black belt. And not only that, she was hard to subdue. And I fought like hell, man. Fought. And then once I gained control of her and got her 10 to 15 feet away from the trail on that little side trail I told you about, she started fighting again. And I had to fight her again for several minutes. And her doing that is what got me caught. Because if I'd been back to the crime scene just a few minutes sooner, just several minutes sooner, I would have beat those people that found the bat, and I would have picked it up. But as it was, I had to fight her twice, bring her all the way around the corner of the mountain, and then secure her to a tree, in spite of her protestations. I got her around to the tree, and she said, no, don't, but she wasn't yelling anymore. I said, honey, don't worry, listen, I just got to go back, I'll be right here, listen. And I said, and also, the first thing I said is, where's your debit card's credit card? In the car, and say, what's the PIN number, 1224? Okay, look, honey, look, I got your credit card, I got your PIN number, it's going to hurt you, I'll be back just a second. Go, just take it. And she just calmed right down. And from then on, She was just cooperating.
He ended up leading them to the Dawson Forest Management Area, which is about 10 miles away from Chattahoochee National Forest. Like Cheryl Dunlap, her body had been decapitated, but the post-mortem identified that this was done after her death, and will have been done in an attempt to hide the identity of the body. He later pleaded guilty for her murder and was given life imprisonment with a chance of parole after 30 years. About a month later, Florida's prosecutors charged him with the murder of Cheryl Dunlap. They claimed that forensic evidence linked him to the case. As much as he tried to fight against it, he was extradited to Leon County and was remanded to await trial for the Dunlap killing. At his trial, prosecutors claimed that he had abducted Dunlap from the Leon Sinks geographical area, held her captive for 2 days, before then killing her and then decapitating her body. They said he had also attempted to eliminate some of the potential evidence by placing her head and her hands in a fire pit, and then he had finally dumped her body in the forest. Hilton's defense team claimed that there was no forensic evidence linking Hilton to the murder. However, the prosecutors had him on video admitting that he had committed the crime. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of 3 of the 4 charges, with a recommendation to impose the death penalty. On the 22nd of February 2011, he was officially sentenced to death for the crime and sent off to Florida's death row. In 2012, Hilton was brought to trial for the 3rd time, this time for the murders of Irene and John Bryant. Hilton made a plea deal with the prosecutor to admit guilt as long as he avoided the death penalty. So he admitted guilt to the killings and to other crimes around the killings, such as robbery, and he was sentenced to an additional life sentence without parole. During the hearings, Hilton described how he had killed Irene immediately on the spot, and he had then kidnapped John to extort him and his bank details, and then he had eventually shot him in the head and dumped his body. I personally don't understand the plea deal because he's already been sentenced to death in Florida, but was it to stop him having 2 death penalties? Because he doesn't have to live out his lifetime sentences before his death penalty. So I don't entirely understand it. If anybody does, please let me know. He's automatically given an appeal because he was given a death sentence. This was put forward in 2008, and he cited that his defense team were dysfunctional and ineffective, but this was denied. But he is still currently a suspect in at least 5 other murder cases. And he's been profiled as well by some of the FBI, and they find it very strange to believe that he started killing people when he was in his 60s. They are quite skeptical, and they believe that he may be responsible for many other murders. And it's terrifying if you think back to the film that he was the creative consultant for, that he had all these ideas of abducting women, letting them go, and then killing them in the woods. And the thing that he did was murder people, mainly women, in the woods and dispose of their bodies. Now, was it a case of he was already doing this before he suggested it as an idea for a film? Or did he have this notion in his brain that one day he was going to do this, and just gave it to rail as an idea for his film? There was one small good thing to come out of all of these disgraceful events, and that is the Meredith Emerson Memorial Privacy Act. On the 25th of February 2010, Hustler magazine actually asked for Meredith Emerson crime scene photos and autopsy photos as part of an open records request through the GBI, so the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. But the victim's family requested that this was denied. They said that Meredith wasn't here to protect her dignity, but somebody had to. In response to this, in March 2010, DeKalb Superior Court Judge Daniel Kersey issued a temporary order that restrained the GBI from releasing any and all photographs that showed Meredith Emerson in any unclothed or dismembered state. But it ended up coming on the same date that the Georgia House, but it ended up being issued on the same date that the Georgia House Governmental Affairs Committee. That's a lot, man. But the order ended up being issued on the same date that the Georgia House Governmental Affairs Committee unanimously passed the Meredith Emerson Memorial Privacy Act. This act actually prevents crime scene photos from being publicly released or disseminated. It actually stops the dissemination of images of victims who in the photos appear nude, bruised, bloodied, or in a broken state with open wounds, a state of dismemberment or decapitation. This seems like this was definitely something that needed to happen. It's horrible that it took the murder of somebody for this to be a thing. I always believed that crime scene photos were only ever seen by the authorities. I think it is very undignified for the poor people who have lost their lives. I investigate a lot of crimes. I don't need to see how that person looked when they were found. I don't think it's something that anybody but the authorities need to see. We've become very desensitized people. I don't think it's something that a person outside of the authorities should look at. I don't think it's something we should be able to see. That was the case of Gary Hilton, also known as the National Forest serial killer. He is currently on Florida death row, and will never see the light of day again, which is exactly what he deserves. It will be interesting to see if anything further ever comes up, and of course if it does, I will update you all. As I say, he is currently a suspect in other crimes, but I didn't want to go into those crimes because he's not been committed, because he's not been convicted of them. But obviously, if you are interested in the other cases, please do feel free to go and have a look. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments about this case. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because every interaction helps. And I will see you guys in the next one.